I was asked by one of my students to do a video about chord melody in a jazz context. So I'm going to present some of my ideas here. And yeah, the first thing I think that's important about, if you want to learn chord melody is you have to know your intervals, which means playing through a tonal center, like for example a C major scale, using intervals. They can be anything from seconds to thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, anything you can play. So now you can already hear the scale there, it's very strong, and obviously if you are looking at a standard tune that's in a certain key, then obviously the melody's also going to use notes from the scale. See, so that's the idea of using thirds. Fourths might even be interesting sometime. Yeah, you have to imagine that we've got a bass player right now, or of course that's another thing I'd like to talk about. Of course, there are different situations we might use chord melody in. One of them might be where we're playing completely alone, solo. But at the moment, first I was just going through these intervals. Fifths, diatonic. So these things can represent a C major chord or any other chord within the scale. We have 7 chords in a diatonic scale. You should know them. Other intervals, sixth, are very, very common. And sometimes we have to think about which fingering we're going to use. So right now I was playing on the G string and the E string, leaving the B string in the middle, not using it. But you could also, with another fingering, you could stretch your fingers a bit and play it that way. Okay. Next thing, I'm trying to go through some basics before we actually attempt to do chord melody. And the next thing you should know are your triads. Major, minor, diminished, augmented. Again, these are found in more complex chords sometimes. Well, all the time actually. So for example, a C major 7 chord would have a C triad on the bottom, and then from the third, an E minor triad. So if we are playing with a bass player, then we could just reduce the C major 7 chord to an E minor triad. And that's much more economical. See, otherwise we're wasting a finger, wasting a voice on playing the root note. The most common C major 7 chord, if you leave the bottom note away, then you've got an E minor triad. So it's a very beautiful thing. So that works also with minor 7 chords, for example, D minor 7. If you leave out the root, you get an F triad. The thing about triads and all sorts of chords, they have inversions, which means the notes are played in different orders, just depending on what we want to do. An F triad could be played on the top 3 strings. That way. It can also be played on the top 4 strings. Here I'm not using the G string. Yeah, it's oh yes I am, sorry. It's a mix. Here I'm not using the B string. Here's no G string, yeah. and here also no G string. So yeah, they're all just the same three notes, in this case F, A, C. But if you know them, yeah, obviously you can use them to play chord melody with. More often than not, you'll find melodies have chord tones in them at some point. Yeah, obviously, because that's what makes them sound good. Okay, other triads we'd probably encounter are diminished, which is a double minor third, and that could be part of a four-note chord, for example, D7 flat 9. Yeah, that's one of the uses of a diminished triad, and it's also got its inversions. They're all the same because it's a symmetrical chord, meaning that each interval is the same. It's always a minor third, so that's a great thing. Fingerings are repeating themselves. Okay, another one is the augmented, which is just made up of major thirds. So again, the fingering repeats itself. That could be a G7, and with a sharp 5 or flat 13, or it could be a G9 sharp 11. There's different uses for triads, and that's why we need to know our scales, because in each scale, as I've already mentioned, you have 7 steps, 7 chords, and these 7th chords are made up of 2 triads, one from the root note, one from the third. Yeah. Okay, just got my notes down here. More complex things, 4-note chords, inversions, or just first of all the root position chord. This is a C major 7, which can be played on 3 string groups. The bottom 4, I wouldn't really recommend it. It's just too wide, at least for my fingers, and it doesn't sound that good. It's using the bottom strings, it sounds a bit fat. But the middle 4 are good, and this is also good. Or there's the inversions. You've probably heard of drop 2 versions. So these would look like on the top 4 and the middle 4. Still early in the morning for me. You need to warm up to be able to do those stretches. And this one. So some of them are a little, not so practical. This, for example, up here, I'd much rather play that one. It's much easier on the top 4. But the point is, it's like, you have to learn the basics, I think. If you're going to be a surgeon, a doctor, you don't just start by operating on somebody and hope you'll learn, as you go. I wouldn't like to be that patient. But no, you've got to practice this stuff. You've got to learn your voicings, because that'll give you, now we've got 4 inversions, so that gives us 4 possible top notes, which is 4 out of 7. See, the scale has 7, and this is already 4 of them. Now, you could change a chord. This is an extremely important thing. Of course, I remember when I first learnt my first chords as a young boy, and then there was the bar A chords, which were really hard to play because you had to push down and play all the strings. But thank God we're not just confined to that sort of thing. If you play a 7th chord, for example, like a C major 7, we've already reduced it to a E minor triad, and let's just say our melody note is up here, so we'd be doubling the B, which you can do, but you might want to play a different note. So I'm looking on the G string, what's available. Okay, if I go up a half step, get to that inversion, nice. If you go up further on the G string, you get a D, and that's a 9. So we've added to the 7th chord, we've added an extension, and that's a nice color. And it's not disturbing the melody. The melody is on top still, and yeah. So that's what when we have more experience, we become flexible. That a chord shape isn't just a static thing that we always play that way. When we are playing an E minor triad that's representing C major 7, we start to change voices just to see if we like the sound. Another one you could do is the sharp 11, which is on the bottom here. You might like that for some usage. Another one that's good. Now I got rid of the 3rd, the E, and it went up to an F sharp. That's a so-called modern sound, but of course it's been around for a long, long time, the sharp 11. It's coming from the basic inversion of C major 7, swapping out the 3rd for the 9, for the sharp 11, sorry. And so now our chord doesn't have a 3rd anymore, but it's also a wonderful thing, you don't need to always have a 3rd in a major 7 chord. Yeah, you can have a 9 instead of the 3rd, and that'll, yeah, it just sounds different. It's more modern. Okay, so another thing is to reduce a chord to a really small sort of shape. C major 7 is the reduced version would just have E and B. I think these are called shell voicings. I don't know if I agree with that description. I don't see a shell here, but I see 3rd and 7. And yeah, obviously now we've got 2 strings on the top that are still available for adding notes that yeah, maybe the chord melody says play a G now. You know, that's the 5th of the chord. So it's it's easy to see where it is, but we'd have to decide what note are we going to play on the B string. Okay, well I can see C, which is, that's one of the drop 2 inversions. So if you've practiced it, you'll immediately see it. You know, you won't have to create the voicing on the spot. You'll just sort of just go through your memory, and hopefully it'll be there. I like to say I put my chords in a drawer. You know, the drawer is full of things that I like to play, you know, that I want to be able to remember. So things that are in the drawer, I know I can open the drawer and pull them out. And yeah, but you've got to use them. If you don't use them, you'll forget them. Okay, so this one's a very nice one because it's got a half step in it. That's the major 7 and the root note. Another note on the B string could be a D, and that's now an E minor 7 chord. You've got to know about upper structures, what's related to your basic chord. If your basic chord's C major 7, then E minor 7 is related to it. It's the chord on the 3rd step of the scale. Like, yeah, that's the C major scale, 3rd step. And if you play a C in the bass, or if your bass player's playing a C, you can use any E minor 7 voicing. to represent C major 7, 9. Okay, so that's really cool that we practiced those drop 2 voicings. Some of them were a bit tough on the fingers, but now we've got a double usage for them. Yeah, they're original as you know, with the root down on the bottom or in some part in the chord, and then as a relative chord based on the third. Okay, and this doesn't just apply to C major 7 or major 7 chords, it applies to any 7th chord. Any 7th chord you have, you know, with 1, 3, 5, 7, can be substituted with a chord starting on the third of that chord. See? So you need to know these relationships. D minor 7 can be substituted with F major 7. And then we end up with D minor 9. And any inversion of F major 7 will work that way. See, so now for chord melody, if we know all this stuff, we've got a huge amount of possibilities in our little drawer there, which we can pull out and use them. The other chord, the dominant 7 chord, of course, has a huge role in jazz standards. There's different tensions or extensions that it can have. One of the most common, I think, is 9. So G7 with a shell voicing, using just the 3rd and the 7. You can add the 9, it's on the B string, it's just there. Another thing is if you just play a small voicing like this, there's probably another place you can do the same thing, because these 3 notes on 3 strings that are adjacent to each other, you'll also find that here in the 3rd position, oh no, that was it. Yeah, so that's something also we need to know. Don't get stuck just playing in one shape all the time. Look for the middle 4 strings if you're playing on the top 4 and vice versa. Okay, another extension is the flat 9. Okay, so first we were talking about relative chords. Relative to G7 is B half diminished. It's, and again, you've got to know your inversions. Okay, and they can be all played as G7 9. There's one more I forgot. That's very common. Oops. That's it. I don't use that very often, that's why I forgot it. And flat 9, yeah, that's often used in a jazz context in minor cadence. So it's a, yeah, diminished chord. That's great because we've got repeating fingerings. Okay, and there are a lot of other things that you can remember, sort of systems or tricks to find substitute chords or relative chords. Over G7, if you want to get more tension on it, you might use something like this, which is flat 9 and a flat 13. And then you can see it's a half diminished chord, F half diminished. So it's a nice, nice collection of colors. We find that in 2 scales, the altered scale and the harmonic minus 5 scale, as G7 coming from C minor. Now, I don't want to talk too much about scales because this is supposed to be about chord melody. But again, if you know the scales and you know the chords that come from these scales, you'll be able to play more interesting chord melody arrangements. That's the idea. Okay, so this, yeah, just finishing up now on this subject of upper structures. F half diminished is related to G7. That's the flat 7. So you can do other inversions of F half diminished. G7, flat 9, flat 13. Okay, so I think it's also important to know what scales we have. The major scale, that'll give us a certain collection of chords. We have to know the steps of the major scale, which chord we have on the 5 or the 4, what extensions we have. They're called modes. You've probably heard of the Dorian mode or the Lydian mode. And yeah, all of these modes, they just give us different extensions over the basic chords. There are other scales that are used. It's harmonic major, which is a major scale with a flat 6. So again, just try to learn the chords that result from this scale, and you'll be surprised sometimes what you get, what extensions you have. Harmonic minor, already mentioned that. Melodic minor, half step, whole step. It's a symmetrical scale based on minor thirds. It's good for dominant chords. It's great. It opens up a dominant 7 chord. Whole tone scale, hexatonic augmented. Sounds really important. Well, it's the description. They're trying to describe what's happening in the hexatonic augmented. It's minor third, half step. That's it. And you just keep repeating that. Now, the chords that arise from this scale, I'm so fascinated by it. And I use it, of course, in chord melody if I can. They're major chords, major 7, but they're in major third distance, from each other. So you've got the 12 tones of the chromatic scale are divided up into 3 equal parts. C, E, A flat. And you get a major 7 chord where you can add a flat 6 to, and you get that. That's why I really like it. And they're all the same, of course. Anyway, I think it's getting a bit too complicated now. I think I've covered most of what I wanted to do before we actually look at an arrangement. Decide what style your arrangement's going to be. Are you going to use sort of fat chords with 4 or 5 notes? Are you going to play solo? Or are you going to play with a rhythm section? Yeah, if you play with a rhythm section, you don't need to play the root notes down the bottom. And the other thing is, reducing even more. You can reduce, as I talked right at the beginning about intervals. You could make an arrangement which is just 2 notes all the time, and with the bass it becomes 3. So it's sort of it's gonna work, and it might be very interesting if you're not filling up everything. But you have to just try different things out, and you'll find things that appeal to you, to your way of hearing things, or you listen to other guitarists who've done chord melody arrangements, and I think back in the 50s they would tend towards bigger voicings, like 4 or 5 notes. Barney Kessel, Kenny Burrell, and Wes Montgomery. He'd be reducing things a bit, because he played with a rhythm section. He didn't really do solo stuff all by himself. Yeah, and then in the 80s you get somebody like Bill Frisell, or before him Jim Hall, who are also great chord melody players, but they have their own style, their own way of doing it. And there's just so many, I can't mention them here all the time. But anyway, I was asked to talk about Night and Day from Cole Porter. It's a nice standard, and the first chord is D minor 7 flat 5 with an 11. This voicing I've chosen has the root note on the bottom, just so that we can get an idea what it sounds like. And it's missing the minor third, which would be an F. But soon after, the melody is going down to an F. So this melody has a lot of chromatics in it. Lands on the third, the C major 7. So without the root note, we'd have this. Yeah? Now I've got my E minor triad and the diminished chord. You don't need to play a chord on every melody note. I think that would be sort of overkill. If you really did want to do it, you could slide up from a half step and resolve that way. That's just a trick. Sounds a bit cheap, but you can resolve, and instead of actually playing two different chords, you're playing one chord. It's the same chord, it's just going up. Okay, another example of that melody being reharmonized, or with chord melody. Let's use a different chord. It's still the F minor triad, but the G is now on top. So and now it's a E triad, or a F and E. It's an upper structure of G7. It's E over G7, which is 13 flat 9. I mentioned there's a lot of scales. One of them is the half step, whole step scale for diminished, for dominant 7 chords, which use diminished chords. And this is one of the chords that's related to G7, E over G. Scale. Yeah, and then we resolve. C major, what could we do? We could do that sharp 11, that modern sound. Instead of playing the 5th, we could play a sharp 11, sharp 5. Then the same phrase repeats. I would put a turnaround in there, an A7. Right, A7 flat 9 will lead us again back to the D half diminished. And I like to also use tritone substitution on dominant chords. So instead of playing a G7 like that, I play a D flat triad over G. That's called tritone substitution. D flat is a tritone away from G. And you could do something like that, just play around with that triad. Okay, so that's the end of the first part of the tune. Now we've got a chromatic thing. So let's look at that. They were the shell voicings. F half diminished, but no flat 5. Just root note, minor third, and flat 7. Same thing for F minor. Same thing for E minor. Now we got a diminished chord with a major 7 going down to a natural 6. So it works very well. if you want to play more, I would recommend using a minor triad over F sharp, half diminished, because that's actually the seventh chord. Now we would have the flat 5 in there. And do the same thing for F minor, use an A flat triad, which is F minor 7 without the root note, G triad on E minor, and on E flat diminished I use a D triad, because that's, as we say, an upper structure. Diminished chords in these sort of jazz standards are often diminished chords. They're dominant 7 chords. They're like disguised a bit. Yeah, the bass, the chord that it's disguising is D7 flat 9. So it's like F sharp to F, E, and D7, and then D minor, G7, C. Okay, so that's why you can use a D triad on a E flat diminished. And of course the melody is D, it's another hint. Now we got a D minor 7. It's getting quite low. Now we don't have the range maybe that a piano does, so the lower we get, the harder it is to play chords under the melody. So in that case, just use intervals. It's good that we've practiced those things. I mean, you could, that's a D minor 7. D minor 7 is F, an F triad. It's yeah, a matter of taste, I think, you know. But if you just played an interval, that nobody would be missing anything. And then we've got this G over G7. Now that's a root note, which gives us a lot of opportunities because it's up here, so we can use strings that are below it. The most obvious, I think, would be a G13 chord, or a flat 13, or both of them. That's the resolution to a C6-9 chord. But it's a matter of choice. You could also play C major 9 or C major 7. It might be a little difficult to use that one at the tempo of the tune, which might be like 1, 2, 3, 4. So therefore you want to pick voicings that aren't that difficult to play. I like it. That works well, but can't get to that in that time. So yeah, it's not a good choice to play complicated things. If you're doing chord melody on a medium tempo jazz standard, the melody still has to groove. You know, it has to be swinging, and the chords are secondary. Yeah, don't clutter it up too much with unnecessarily complicated stuff. Okay, let's look at the B section. It goes up a minor third from C major up to E flat major 7. You could lead that in with a cadence. You could play F minor 9, leading into the B section. We've seen that before. You could also play it here. I like that one. That's now B flat 7, 13, flat 9. Two interesting colors, 13, flat 9. That's F minor 9. 6-9 again. it's very diatonic in the B section. It's sort of modal, I guess you could say. It's just one chord, E flat major, C major. So the melody is, of course, diatonic. You're playing that. That's a possibility. Play it in sixths. And then we've got back to C. Yeah, that's a Frizzell type of thing. When you do that, bending the neck a little bit, that's something that Bill Frizzell does a lot. Okay, now we've got the phrase with the F sharp half diminished, which just repeats again. Before, a few minutes ago I said use A minor, A flat major. I realized that I can use the open G string, which is a G, and that's a 9 on F minor 7. So it's an interesting color, yeah, and it's just easy to do it because you just lift up your second finger there. And with E minor, you can use an open G string, F sharp, G, D. So that's a 9 again. And then we got the D triad, which is the upper structure of E flat diminished. Melody, it's all chromatic, isn't it? So that's just a diminished chord. Even diminished chords have extensions. Yeah, in this case, it's flat 6 on E flat diminished. So it's not part of the chord. The diminished chord has those notes, but the B natural, which is the flat 6, you have to add it to the chord. So there's one way, just play the diminished corner of the middle 4 strings, and then lay your little finger down, or don't play the bottom note, just play a 4-note voicing, or that's another one I like, because it leads to the very common diminished 7 chord. And now D minor was like at the beginning of the tune, with an 11 and a flat 5. This voicing here doesn't have the third, it does have the third now, but it doesn't have the flat 5, but it has a 9. And then you can the ending, is obviously C major 7. You can play D flat major 7. In this case, I'm using a 6/9 with a major 7 on it, and then yeah, that's a common ending, or it's a turnaround really. Instead of playing D, G, C, you play a D, D flat major, C. Yeah, and of course the melody is a C note, so that's why we have to play a D flat major 7, because that's the 7 in the D flat major 7 chord. I'll just sort of play